Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending today's webinar. We'll get started in just a moment, and as we wait for some more folks to get themselves connected to the webinar, I'll just do my usual preamble, and I'll see if I can remember to tell you my name this time. So I am Amanda Vellutini, and I will be putting on this webinar today. The topic is going to be about new administrators and some general information on the admin control panel, league versus team type permissions for administrators, the recommended permissions, and then some best practices for managing your organization based on some of the roles that we'll be discussing in the permission discussion. You'll notice that you don't have options to talk during the webinar, audio options for you, but there is a chat. And you can throw any questions or comments that you have into the chat. Today, I do have Christian with me to help monitor the chat because we are expecting quite a few folks to be joining today. And so I wanted to make sure that it wasn't just my eyes trying to follow the chat for you there. So any questions you have, absolutely feel free to throw those into the chat. I will also point out just before we get started, because sometimes I run out of time and you may have to run, is that we do have all kinds of great help information available and access to our support team if you need anything or if you have any questions following the webinar. So we do have an FAQ. This is a searchable area for you to go and find help information on just about every topic and feature within the Goalline system. And then we also have our new Goalline support portal that we're sort of, no, this is the old knowledge base. I apologize. So this knowledge base is just another area where you can find help about Goalline. You'll also see all kinds of other products within the Stack Sports family. One that may pertain to you is going to be about our Stack Pay platform, which yeah, there it is. So if you use Stack Pay with your registration tools on Goalline, you may find this Stack Pay help information helpful as well. And then we also have some webinar listings that you can check out. We've also got a YouTube channel, and we'll be updating some of these menu items to point to our new help center when that goes live. So just wanted to point out those options there. So if you aren't sure about what questions you have now during today's webinar, you'll have plenty of access to help information and the support team down the road. So as I said, today's webinar is about new administrators. The permission structure within Goalline really is designed to help you delegate all of the responsibilities for managing a sport organization. Not really specific to any sport. Goalline can be used for any number of sports. Basically, if you are a team sport, then we can handle what you need to do, and all of these tools are going to relate there. Nothing that we're going to talk about today is going to be sport specific. I may reference things here and there like ice versus fields and things like that, but the terminology is really well used across all of the different sport types. So we'll get started by doing a quick overview of the admin control panel. So what we're seeing here on the screen is the admin control panel, and we're at what we call the master menu. Just make that a little bigger so we can see all the options a little better through the recording. So the way that you access the admin control panel is whatever site type you have. So this demo site here, I would select the admin login from the upper right-hand corner. My other demo site that I use a lot, same thing, admin login in the upper right-hand corner. And when you log in, you're going to be brought to the master menu of your organization. What you'll find is that there are 3 layers, and not every administrator is going to have access to all 3 layers. The master menu in general is where your main contact for sure is going to have access, but every other administrator that's added through the Manage Website Admin tool would have access to one or more of those menus depending on the permissions that are granted to them. When we look at the master menu, this is here to manage things across the entire organization and the entire website on the public side there. While the league or team control panels restrict whatever action it is that you're doing to that specific league or team that you happen to be managing. To create a web page, for example, that shows up on your homepage in the menu, you would do that from the create web page tool in the master menu. If you wanted to create a web page that's part of a team menu or a league menu on your site, you would create that web page from that league or team specific menu. So you'll find that most of the tools that are available at the master menu, there's going to be a similar set of tools at the league and the team level. So generally speaking, you're going to use this master menu to create and manage registration forms for individuals and teams. So where you're going to find that is in the people section. So when it comes to adding players, adding coaches, virtually all of the people that get into your system, regardless of their role, are going to be added through the people section. The one exception is referees or umpires or officials. Those are going to be added through the officials tab of your control panel if you're using the referee tools in Goalline, what we call our advanced ref system. But generally, everything you're going to do to add people is going to be done in the people section of your master menu. If I want to create a registration form for coaches, for players, for volunteers, or even for referees, I'm going to do that in the individual registration form tool here. And when I come in here, I can create new forms, I can copy forms, I can edit forms and preview them. So this is something that you would do at the master menu level. League and team menus do not have registration forms. Registration is for an individual to register with your organization. And then once they're registered, they would further be assigned to a division or league or a team specifically. And we'll talk a little bit down the road here on what permissions come into play when it comes to managing that all the way through. We also have team registration, so leagues and tournaments who want teams, like entire teams, to register. You can use team registration forms. It works in a similar way. You create, manage, and edit your forms here, and the teams that are registered become part of your leagues that exist up here. This is also where the master menu is also where you're going to go to report on registration information and assigning players to teams. So when I want to report on registration information using the athlete or player example here, I can search for anything that I want, but this is where I have my registration options. So all the registration forms that have been available are listed here. So if I want to see who's registered for 2021 in this against this form, I select all of my different criteria and I search against that specific registration form in this area here. All of the registration forms that you can create for individuals do have a specific person type registering for them. If I'm searching for players, that's where I go. If I'm looking for coaches, I'm going to look for view edit coaches or find coaches. So view edit coaches here allows me to do the same thing. I don't have any registration forms on this one here that have been for coaches in the past, but your individual people are searched in their individual search features. And if there is registration associated, that's where you're going to go to do that registration searching. The other thing that we can do related to registration reporting is going to be found in people as well in the reports section. There's all kinds of different types of reports in here. The one I'll point you to is your transaction report. This is going to be that report you'd use for financial reconciliation, not so much to look at, how many registrants do you have, but this would reconcile with your banking information and your stack pay reporting. All the different reports and things you can do with respect to the people in your system are going to be found at that master menu in the people section. Another really common feature to use here is going to be your athlete info displayed, or this may say edit player info displayed. This is where you can go and configure custom search results to show up when you are doing those searches. And you'll find this, we're looking at player, but you'll find the same feature available for coaches, registrants, volunteers, and officials and referees. You can use this tool to display or to decide what displays when you're displaying things like rosters, player profiles. If you have leagues, the league leader statistics pages, but it also allows you to configure your own import sample spreadsheet and your team list export, which is only available to those who are actually logged into the system, which is why we're allowed to show all this extra information that we don't have available to place on the public facing website. So that is generally what we see at the master menu with respect to reporting on registration information. When you want to assign players, lots of ways to do that in Goalline. You may have it so that players are just assigned to their team as they register as an individual. You may have teams who register through a team registration form and they've provided the roster with their registration form, or you can have players who are just in the system, whether they registered or not, and you can assign players to teams using either assign multiple athletes or by just searching for an individual and assigning that one individual to a team. Assign multiple athletes is a great tool to use from the master menu so that you can continue delegating the task of distributing players to teams at the different league menus that you may have. Using the example of an organization running a house league where a whole bunch of players, maybe you've got 100 players signed up for your U9 house league. So you can assign all of those players based on their age and gender and their registration status for having registered, say, for your U9 boys options here. I can just use the control key to select more than one of those options so that I'm catching all the players who signed up for U9. And then it would allow me to display those athletes and either assign them to my U9 division so that someone else can do the same task to assign them to the individual teams, or I can do this from here and just assign them directly to their team. So assigning players is typically done, at least to get started, from that master menu, either using the assign multiple option or by using just find athletes and assigning them to teams one at a time. The master menu is also used for managing your leagues or divisions and your rep teams. So I've already said it quite a few times. I'm referring to leagues. Really, when I say league, I might be referring to what you're calling a division or a category or a class or a tier, age, skill, gender, like those kind of groupings. So when I say league, it's a little bit more equivalent to what you would refer to as a division. Your Goalline site is, you might be representing the whole league, but you have divisions within your league. If you're a tournament, your site is representing the tournament, and the leagues are going to represent the divisions that are available in the tournament. So when it comes to managing leagues, this is where you come to create all of the different divisions that you need to manage. So we've got U18 boys AAA, U18 girls AAA. So this is a great example where the teams in this division do not play the teams in this division. And then, if we've got other divisions going on, however many you have, you create all of the divisions that you need. This particular demo site is a multi-sport site, and that applies to a lot of organizations like yourselves as well. High school organizations or, school athletic associations, or even just community centers, maybe running multi-sport goal line sites. So when you create each of your divisions, not only are you creating the division based on the age, skill, and gender, but you're also going to tell the system what sport are they. And that's going to make sure that once we get into that division or league menu, that we see the terminology that's appropriate. Hockey and soccer or hockey and baseball are great contrasts, where in hockey, we're going to see terminology like rink and ice, and we're going to see, referees, whereas in baseball, we're going to see fields, and we're going to see umpires. The terminology when it comes to reporting games, penalties versus misconduct and cards in soccer and that type of thing. So selecting the appropriate sport, if you happen to be multi-sport, that's done through your managed leagues. We're going to talk closer to the end of the webinar about some best practices. But when we talk about adding all of your leagues and all of your teams, this is what we're referring to. This is really that foundation that when you create the divisions and the teams that you need right from the get-go of getting set up on your new Goalline site, that allows you to be sort of set up for success down the road. And typically what you should find is that when you create that division, it's going to be the same forever, basically. Boys U18 AAA is always going to be boys U18 AAA. I'll give an example where there may have been a change, but all we have to do is make a quick edit to the wording. Is that for anybody from Canada, and especially anybody in the hockey world, is now understanding that instead of using names like novice, peewee, novice Adam, peewee bantam, and so on, they're now going to be using just age categories like a lot of other sports have already been using. So no more bantam, it's going to be U15. No more peewee, it's going to be U13. So if I did have, instead of this being U18, if I had this listed as major midget or junior, I can change that label, and it doesn't change anything else. It just pushes that label down through so that I don't have to delete my league or create a new one. I can just edit the name of the existing one to make sure that it's more appropriate based on what our organization is calling our leagues. So you'll find that when you go to do this, you'll see all kinds of different age and skill level labels that you can choose. These really aren't going to be the end of the world if they're not correct. So this one, if I selected midget major, but now we're using U18, this value is not going to change too much of it. It's not really going to change anything. It's just demographic information. So setting up your leagues and teams is going to be done through here. And it is really important to have a good understanding of whether you should be one or the other. And when we call it a league, we mean a division that you manage. You manage everything about it. You schedule the games for all of the teams, and you maintain the standings. It's your job to know what the tie-breaking rules are and so on. If you don't do all of that and you just need a team that plays in someone else's league, then what you have are association teams. And another label that people use a lot for association teams is going to be rep team, or sometimes they're labeled as travel team, elite team, select team. But rep team is the one that's kind of familiar across most sports, have used that term in some way, shape, or form to represent what Goalline is referring to as your association teams. So these are teams that you manage, but you only manage, you create their schedule for practices, and you receive a schedule from someone else with your team's, home and away games on it. But that league is managed somewhere else. The standings are managed somewhere else. That's a rep team. So, if we think about a national league, and I'm Nova Scotia, because that's where I live, my Nova Scotia team is a rep team because my league is going to be managed by the national site, for example. So I'm only concerned about things that happen for my Nova Scotia team, and I don't care about the standings for anybody else. So that means I have a rep team. Lots of organizations have a bit of both. When we talk about house leagues, what's really, really common to see is to have a set of rep teams that represent your AAA or your tier 1 teams that play in another league. And then you might have your own house leagues that you run and that you manage everything. So things like U7 groups or U9 groups that you manage. And it's sort of an internal thing where you have more than one team in, say, your U7 house league. Maybe you have 4 or 5 teams, but no one else is managing that. It's all just you. So in that case, you've got both. You'll have leagues to represent whatever you manage, all full circle with house leagues. And then rep teams are your association teams that are going to receive their schedule from someone else. If that someone else is using Goalline as well, we've got some great schedule tie-in tools that allow you to kind of skip the step of having to upload or add your schedule to your own site, because we've got some tie-in tools that can just push and pull schedule and roster information back and forth. If that sounds like something that you might be able to take advantage of where you are, reach out to our support team and we can get started with that conversation. If we manage your league and you have a separate Goalline site, we can probably get you tied in and create some efficiencies for everyone involved as far as managing those schedules go. The next thing that we do at the master menu, once we have leagues and association teams all set up and ready to go, now we need to tell the system that they have a season and that they have schedules. So you manage your season and manage your schedule from the master menu. You will find that these features are available from the league and team control panels as well. I strongly recommend that this is managed at the master menu level. That provides a lot more consistency across all of your leagues and teams so that everything is managed in a very similar way, makes things a lot more consistent when it comes to next year or a couple of years from now. As we know, in sport organizations, it's often volunteer based, and those volunteer roles do tend to turn over every couple of years. So if you do this from the master menu and you manage your season according to a lot of our best practice recommendations, then it's going to be a lot easier for that new admin to step in and see what's going on. I'm going to go over to a different demo site here so that I can click on that from my demo site that has a lot of schedule history, and we can kind of see a little bit of what I mean there. So I'm going to find in my schedules, settings, manage seasons. And when I come in here using my women's league as my example, as I do all the time, you can see here that I've got season information that goes all the way back to 2012. And each season has its history here. Some have been made active again that maybe don't need to be active. But we can see here that I've called my season something rather consistent every year. So if I was to turn over and hand over my volunteer hat to another administrator, they'd be able to look at this and say, okay, it looks like when I create my next season, I should probably use the season name 2022-23 because that would make it consistent with the format that's been used for all of the previous seasons. I can also see what those date ranges were. So in my case here, typically I go from August 1st to July 31st. And the reason that I've selected that is because it covers all of the different needs that I have through this season, catching all of the schedules and catching my registration period where I have players that I might be assigning to teams. We might not start playing until September or maybe even October, but I want my players to start registering in August. And so I might be forming teams as early as August. And so I want to make sure that my season is current in August. And again, we'll summarize a few best practices, but keeping this in mind here really does help out when it comes to what do we do next year, because we want our season to be managed from the master menu. And the more consistent you are, as you can see here, I've got lots of different divisions on this site, but they're all in the same season. It's super easy for me to come in here and look and see that everyone has an active season that's called 21-22. So I know that everybody's been rolled forward. I know that everybody's got the season with the same date range as everybody else. And that makes it much easier for me to go and proceed with the next part of what I would do on a season basis, and that is going to be the managed schedules piece. The managed schedules, Goalline does require, so we already went over, we've added our divisions and or our association or rep teams. We've created a season for them. Now we need a schedule for them. So I do want to add a schedule. Generally, you're going to call that the regular season. You may want to create an exhibition schedule. You may need a tournament schedule. You may need a playoff schedule and so on. But this gives me a quick snapshot that in my women's league, I've got 2 schedules available. If I need a playoff schedule, I can create that here and apply that to all of the divisions that need a playoff schedule. The great thing about doing this from the master menu is that I can do it for all of them at the same time. If I do this from the individual league menu, I have to do it from each individual league menu, and that would be a lot more work. If you have lots of administrators and they're spreading that task across and everybody's responsible for their own thing, maybe that's not such a burden, but it is something to consider that for consistency's sake and for ease of rolling forward into a new season, I do strongly encourage this to be done from the master menu. When it comes to what do you do in between these seasons, we've done manage leagues and manage association teams. I shouldn't really have to revisit that unless we expand as an organization, or we shrink and I need to hide some teams. But the manage season and schedule part, I'm going to do that every time my season is over. So at the end of August, I want to, or sorry, at the end of July, in my case, I want to roll my season forward so that we're in an active season for next year, and then everything gets ready to go. The last thing that we would do just kind of in general from the master menu is going to be your website and some basic settings. So the website content that we see, I'll just hop over to the public side here. I have a gold layout website, and my master menu is where I am in control of the menu that exists here. So I have tools that allow me to place items in this menu. I can change things like menu labels for standard items. I can choose what I want in the menu here. There are some things that our Goalline support team may need to turn on and off for you, such as our scrolling game center here. If you have a silver website, you can turn this on and off yourself, and we'll pop in real quick and take a quick peek at the differences between the two. But support can turn this off for you here as well. The next thing that we'll look at in the website side of things is we'll take a quick peek at managing your standard menu settings. This is where you make those choices. Generally, I recommend very few people having access to these kinds of features because they do change. If I was to just kind of change around where everything is displayed, it's going to drastically impact my public facing website, and folks who've gotten used to where to go to get to their referee login, for example, might get lost and might have some trouble finding it. If I accidentally stop displaying my teams in the menu, then you can't navigate to your team menu. So keeping the permissions for some of these more settings related things is recommended to be kind of restricted to only the folks who really need access to those things. Another area is site configuration. This is another one where generally you don't come in here too often. You'll come in here to turn on or off some specific things when you're getting started, but you don't often have to come back into this tool. The silver layout that we'll pop into in just a moment here, slightly different story just because there's a couple other things you can do in that one. But this, when we get into site configuration, you'll find that it's grouped into all kinds of different items related to, registration related things, menu items, front page display kind of items, and that type of thing. So front page display things like how many news articles do you want, and do you want a standard menu item to be in your menu, or do you want it to be a team menu instead? And so there's lots of different things that you can do. Gold layouts also would use this tool to manage what is placed in the call out boxes that are placed below that news slider. And I'll just point out where that is. So here's our news slider, and here are our 3 call out boxes. So that site configuration tool allows me to configure what goes in to these boxes. Once these things are set, they generally don't get changed too often. You, of course, can change them as frequently as you'd like. But to my earlier point, once people know where to find things, it's not always a great idea to go move things around on them. When it comes to the silver layout, there is an additional option when it comes to your site configuration tool that allows you to manage the entire responsive design of your site. So I'm just going to click on the same tool, and we'll see that there's just one additional option in that tool for site configuration that's not available on the gold sites. So this is launch homepage customization tool here. This is what allows me to really personalize the homepage of my silver layout. But the same idea is that I decide what goes into various modules, and this is how I can make some of those larger changes to how I want things to look. If I don't want 4 of these, I want 2 of these, I can make that adjustment in the site configuration tool if I have a silver layout website. Everything else in the website section does behave exactly the same. It's really just that one additional tool that's available there. So that covers essentially what we do at the master menu. There are, of course, as you can see, lots of different items in the master menu. And I do have some other webinars and help information that describe a little bit more about each individual item. But I wanted to touch on just kind of the broad strokes of what we do at the master menu. I'm just going to refer to the chat here. So we have a question about user specific roles. So you're a new registrar. That's great. This webinar isn't going to be covering the in-depth part of what a registrar's role would do, but we are going to talk about just sort of the general order of things. And we are going to talk about recommended permissions, which could be really useful for you. So if you find yourself, not being able to do something that I've told you, I recommend you should be able to do based on your role, then it could be a permission issue that you let your association know. Amanda said in the webinar that I should have access to viewing registration data to make sure that you have the appropriate permissions to do the task that you have. So I am going to summarize a little bit of what permissions you would have at different levels. And yes, do I have a webinar that goes into more detail on websites? I absolutely do. And I can never remember. I don't think it's linked right in the menu. So while I'm thinking about this, I'll just click on our YouTube here. Goalline has a YouTube channel. And on our YouTube channel, we try to upload all of our webinar recordings. So including this one, we'll see this one up on the video listing on the Goalline channel. And there are a couple in here that are going to reference things like websites, website menus, and things like that. So that's something that you can check out there. But if you have trouble finding something specific, maybe reach out to the support team and we can point you in a more specific direction. The next question I see there, where can we find the fees that are charged per registrant? That is something that is going to be, each organization may have a different set of fees and processing fees. So that would be something to reach out directly to the Goalline support team to inquire about your specific organization. If you're not using registration yet, then we can also get you in touch with either myself or with Trevor Scott, who can get you set up with a StackPay merchant account and would describe essentially what kind of fees and things are related to that. So moving on to the next part of our webinar here is talking about the next layer of our menu. So we were just looking at the master menu. Lots of things get done in the master menu, but lots of things also happen in our league and team control panels. So when it comes to the league control panel, you would use the drop down here to select what division it is you want to go to. I'm going to hop over actually to my demo site over here because I like using a very specific league. So my women's league is what I'm going to pick from here. So the league control panel, it's used to manage the activities and communication, things like that for the specific league or division that you've selected. Someone who manages a division wants to access this control panel so that they can manage all of the teams that belong to this division, the schedules, the statistics, and any kind of email announcements that need to go out that are specific to the people who are in this division, assigned to teams in this division. So you would use this control panel if you are looking to add teams to a league. So these are not rep teams. These are teams that belong to a division. And if you're using team registration, you may not have to do this part at all. But if you're not using team registration, then you do need to come in and add teams to your division. In my division here, I've got all kinds of different teams. Some of them have used registration in the past, but most of them I've just added manually. To add one manually, I would just create click that I want to add one, give it a name, hit enter. Now that team is part of this division. Even if you were using team registration, so you don't have to actually add the teams, they would automatically be listed here with when they registered. You might want to edit them for various reasons. So editing them, I can change the team name if I want to. I can include additional information about them, such as their jersey color. A lot of times what we'll see here is you'll see like a slash. So like their home might be blue and their away is white, or other way around, or their home is red and their away is black, or whatever it happens to be. So you can insert that information. and it's just basic information available about that team. But you can also include things like team photos, descriptions, and a logo. If the team has its own website somewhere else, or even a specific URL you want to drop them to within your own goal line site, you can do that here. And what this does is it really just starts to create a nice, robust league situation where people can really drill down and see more and more about the teams that are participating in your league. Adult organizations are going to find this stuff really, really helpful because it's probably not going to change much from year to year. Whereas youth organizations, there may be lots and lots of changes from year to year. And so sometimes these features just aren't really super necessary if you don't want to have to upload new team photos each year and that type of thing. So you can do more than just adding teams using that feature, but that is one of the main reasons that you would use that. The other thing you do in here is if you still need to assign players, you would be doing that from this area too. So we saw earlier, there's an assign multiple players at the master menu. If they went ahead and dumped, 100 players into your division so that you can assign them to the teams within your division, you can do that using this tool. And only the players that have been assigned to your division are going to show up in this particular tool. So anybody who has been assigned to the men's division is not going to be in your list, and you don't have to filter through and deal with that side of things. So depending on how your organization proceeds through the process of assigning players to teams, you may or may not find the assign multiple player here useful. There's also ways for you to manage rosters by just clicking players and parents. So this allows me to select at the league level. I can select any of the teams that exist within this league and view their roster. I can add players to the roster. I can release players from the roster. I can edit players who exist on this roster, all if I have, of course, the appropriate permissions to do that. But that's typically what we're doing at this menu level is we're managing the rosters and assigning players up until or including roster locks to make sure that rosters stay within your organization's rules as far as when you're allowed to make changes. This is also, of course, where you're going to go to create your schedules, or maybe it's uploading a schedule file or using the Goalline schedule generator to create your regular season schedule. So your schedule that you created earlier when we were looking at managing seasons and schedules, now I have my regular season and my exhibition schedule tools here. I can create games on either one of those schedules, or I can, as I said, I can use the generate schedule option to just make it give me a schedule for, based on the teams that are in this division. Uploading a schedule file can be done here. Uploading a schedule file, I should note, can be done at all three layers of your menu. It depends on how you receive that schedule and how you prepare your file, whether or not you should do it from the league menu or if you could do it from the master menu. The difference being uploading a file here will only allow me to add games to this division, games or practices, I should say, to this division, but any of the teams within the division. If I'm at the master menu, I can upload one file with games and or practices in it for all of the teams and all of the divisions across the entire site. So from the master menu, I can upload all of these divisions games in one single file if I wanted to. From the league menu, I'm only dealing with this one league. That is probably one of the most popular methods of doing the schedule upload, managing your season and schedule being done at the master menu, then proceed with uploading a schedule or adding games from the league specific control panel. But you have lots of options there just based on how you get your data and what you have available to you. Now that we have games in the system, the other thing we do from the league menu is, of course, report those games. So the statistics tab is going to allow you to report games for any of the schedules that you have. And again, this is broken down by schedule. If you also have a tournament schedule, that can be in this list as well. And then depending on what sport you are and what level of individual statistics Goalline offers for your sport, there should be some additional stat report options or a penalty minute or misconduct reports that that you can view in here. So with hockey, and I believe with soccer and lacrosse, we have some pretty robust statistics tools that pull in the information that's collected when you're reporting games. It's obviously important that if you want a penalty report, you do have to report individual stats so that you're getting penalty information. But at the very least, reporting games is done in here. So you could be reporting just the score of a game, or you can be reporting full individual player stats. I'll click to report here just so we can get a quick view of what that typically looks like. Oh, I don't have a roster for this one, so I can't really do it. But when you have individual stats here, you would, you see your rosters and you're going through and you're adding specific goals and penalties, goalie stats, if that's applicable to your sport, and then ending that game to make it a final score. So that's typically what we're doing at the league admin level. There are various menus here. So just click back on league admin. So these are going to be divided into some different sections. So we've got our league admin tools where we add our teams, typically manage those team assignments. And then a lot of the stuff that's in here, stuff that you wouldn't necessarily need to use on a regular basis. We will talk more about team attendance in a moment here when we look at our team level layer. But we'll see that there is an email announcement option here. This is where I want to go if I want to send an email announcement to people who belong to this division. And then within the division, I can say just all of the teams, or I can specify specific teams and use the control key to select more than one. So communicating with your division from the league control panel is a nice, easy way for you to send out an email announcement that goes out to everyone who just happens to be part of that division. Very, very similar to the email announcement form that you see on the master menu, just restricted to this one division and the teams that belong to this division. Website options here, as I mentioned right at the top, these are things that would only affect the league specific menu. So if I create a web page here, it's a web page that would belong to my women's league division menu. It's not going to be placed in the main menu of the homepage of the website. So lots of ways for your different divisions and teams to add lots of specific information about themselves, and great web pages with good content on them as needed there for divisions. So then the next layer that we have is our team layer. So I'm going to go and select a rep team just to see what that looks like at the rep team level. So when we get into our team control panel, it's very, very similar to the league control panel. The difference is, yet again, we're now restricted to everything we do here is just for this one team. So when I add edit players, I don't pick a roster because there's only the one. I don't have a roster on this team apparently, but when I'm managing the roster, it's just this one team's roster. So if I want to add players, I can add players here. If I'm adding existing players, it will recognize that they exist already. It won't create duplicates. But from this menu, I can't just search and use assign multiple players because that would be done from one of the other menu layers to have an administrator kind of give you a chunk of players that you can distribute amongst teams when you're at the league level. But when you're at the team level, you're just waiting for players to be assigned to your team. Typically, that is going to be done at either the league or master menu level. But if you're responsible for that as a coach, you could just come in here and add players. First name, last name, and date of birth is required in order to add a person. If they already exist, it will just bring in that person's profile based on the name and date of birth that you entered into the system. And then the rest of their information would populate if you go to edit them again later. If someone already assigned your roster for you, then your roster would be listed in here. The other thing you would do as a fairly popular task from this team level is going to be to add or edit games and add or edit practices. And we'll talk about some best practices in a couple of minutes here that are going to talk a little bit about what may be the best from the top down. But when I want to add a game, the main difference here is adding games and practices has to be involving the team that I'm dealing with. I cannot create a game between this team 2 and team 3 because I'm U15 boys. I need to create a game that has my team either as visiting or home against anybody else, or against TBA if I don't know who we're going to play. So it just restricts the fact that everything we do with schedules related to this team, it has to involve that team. That's another way for you to recognize if you're saying to yourself, well, I need to create a game between team 2 and team 3. Um, but they're not, but we're using this as rep teams. That would be a red flag. That would be something that would tell you, these teams should be set to play against each other. I should be able to do that. And they're all my rep teams. Or maybe we're a division and we, instead of creating rep teams, should have created a house league for them. So there's ways for you to kind of recognize if this doesn't feel right, then there might be something that you want to set up a little bit differently or move the team to a different division. The other thing that you can do, of course, is adding or editing your practices. When it comes to practices, you may or may not be given this permission as a coach, and there are some recommended permissions that I'll talk about next. But if you don't have access to do these things, then someone else in the organization definitely would or should. So you would request changes through someone else if that's something that you need. But adding practice information. The difference as you go down the layers of menu is just that I don't pick a team here because we're already the U15 boys team. Whereas if I'm adding practices from the league or master menu, I pick the team or teams involved in any given practice. The other big tool that people use in here, and you may use it just to set it up and then use the mobile app going forward, because once it's set up, you can just do a lot of this in the mobile app, is setting up your team attendance. Team attendance is automatically built into the goal line system. You just have to set it up and tell it to automatically send out the questions and have players receiving their team attendance notifications. Then they tell you, yes, I'm coming, no, I'm not coming. That way you know in advance whether or not you have enough players or need to do some call ups or call up some affiliates, or maybe it's canceling a practice because there aren't enough players to make it worthwhile. So team attendance is built in at the team level. It can be set up and managed from the league level, but it is a team specific setup. So even if I was doing this at the league level, I would select a team first and then edit my team attendance options to get that set up. So my recommendation is that your team coaches or managers who have access to Goalline, they should have access to team attendance for their team, or if they have more than one team, great. But the league administrator really isn't going to be the one that's going to be concerned with team attendance. That's something that's going to be dealt with at a different level. And then, of course, reporting game scores may be something that you're responsible for as well. If you're a rep team and you want to report your game scores, you would do that. This would be in addition to any game reporting that's happening elsewhere from the actual league. So you can report your scores and even your own full individual player statistics, even if the league that manages your schedule isn't doing those full statistics. So that covers our team control panel. And as I've done this a few times and I never mentioned what I was doing, when I click on the logo up here, the Goalline logo, this brings me back to the master menus. This is sort of like a home button, the same way as when you click on your logo on your website. So if I click somewhere else and I come in and I click the logo, it brings me back to the home page. So you'll find that on all of our sites here. If I just click and go somewhere else. Anytime I click on my logo in the gold layout, it's the banner, brings me back to that home page. So that's why I keep clicking on the Goalline logo up here to get myself back to the main menu. So let's talk about website administrator types. The questions already come up a little bit about different roles, and absolutely there are a ton of different roles that people have, or I often refer to them as, the different hats we wear based on what time of day it is and what we're working on. So the types of administrators that exist are going to be either team administrators or league administrators. You will always have at least one administrator who is set as a main contact, and that administrator is kind of neither. They're neither a team or a league administrator because they have access to all three of these layers of the menu. Anybody who is not a main contact is either a team or a league administrator. And the distinction is really just whether or not you have access to all three layers or just master menu and a league or a team, not both. And I should point out, you may or may not have access to the master menu at all. If you only have team specific permissions when you log in, you don't even get to the master menu. You're just told, either select a team, or if you only have access to one, you're brought right to that team's menu specifically. So you don't even have to navigate yourself. So I'm going to click on Add Admin. When you go to add an administrator, someone who is either going to be maybe the new main contact for your organization, or they are a division coordinator of any type, I recommend that you select the league administrator option, and the other option here is team administrator. The league administrator is going to be someone who has access to one or more divisions within your site. General personal information needs to be added in here just so that we've got somewhere, a name and an email address to associate with the profile. And then as we scroll down here, we'll see the different permissions. They're going to be broken up into association wide. And because we clicked on league administrator, we see league specific. So here I could be granted specific permissions for one or more of the leagues that exist here. And these are grouped into the same kind of groupings that we see in those menus. Let me see here. So in the case of, like, if you're managing rosters, a league admin can change the roster for all of the teams in that specific league. So in my league admin tools, I'll just make this bigger again. In my league admin tools, if I have access to viewing and editing the roster, or adding and editing players, this lets me do this for all of the teams in this division. So I can do that task for everything involving this entire division. When we get to a team administrator, it's just one team at a time. So this league administrator would be able to access the Winnipeg Men's Volleyball League, and then they would be able to manage rosters for all of the teams within using that, add players option that we were looking at a little bit earlier. They can create games and practices. So typically we would want to see permissions for that. And so creating games or practices for any of those teams or leagues in the division. So a league administrator typically should be granted the following. So I generally recommend kind of all of the communication tools, but very specifically the email announcements, so that they can send an email announcement to members of the division that they manage. When it comes to the league admin tools, add edit players or view edit rosters should be granted. One or both should be granted. If I'm allowed to add players to the system who don't exist in the system, I need the ability to add. If I'm only allowed to manage the rosters that exist, I would have view edit team access. So as an organization, you want to make the correct choice there. Add, edit, delete teams is another one that you want to grant to a league coordinator so they can manage those team-specific items within their division. Adding and editing coaches is another one that they should probably have access to so they can view the coach list and, add them, edit them, or release them from teams as needed. Managing locked rosters is another one. If you plan on using any roster lock tools, which are available to everyone either through site configuration to just lock them all, or through team registration tools to lock them on certain dates and things, you want to have someone who has the ability to manage locked rosters. A team administrator cannot manage a roster if it's locked, but this league administrator can. You can grant them the attendance option, as I mentioned earlier, but it's not necessary at the league level. And then when it comes to scheduling tools, typically they should be the ones that can create games and possibly create practices, upload a schedule file, and view the master schedule. So viewing the schedule, this is available on the public side, but viewing the master schedule from the admin side allows you to export it as well, and then you can do a little bit of manipulation and reporting on that schedule. And then when it comes to statistics, everything that's available in your statistic category should typically be granted to a league coordinator. And I'm just going to scroll down to find my baseball one because there are some specific to baseball for pitch count reporting that a league coordinator who does a baseball league should have access to that as well. So those are the typical permissions that are recommended for someone who plays the role of a league coordinator, or sometimes they're conveners, lots of different terminology used there. But if that role sounds familiar within your organization, those are generally the permissions that I recommend that you grant. Based on your organization, you may need to give them more or less of those permissions, just really based on how much you want to delegate and how much is being controlled at that master menu level. So now let's move on to team administrator. So I'm just going to click back here, and instead of clicking league, we'll click team. We're going to see that it's almost exactly the same as what we were just looking at. So as far as the demographic and association-wide permissions, that's all going to be the same. But when it comes to team-specific permissions, again, we're really just restricting down to that team level. And I can have access to more than one of these, more than one team if I happen to manage more than one team. So if they can create games and practices, give them that permission. Team admin tools that I do recommend that you grant is going to be, at the very least, viewing and editing the team roster so that they are going to be able to release players from their team if they need to, and then adding and editing players if they should be able to add players or edit players' personal profile information. Grant this permission as well. Add, edit, delete teams is only really necessary for a rep team here when it comes to adding the opposing teams that you play against. If it's a league team, I do not recommend giving access to this tool because a team level administrator shouldn't be doing that for their team. That's something that a league convener or coordinator would do. Adding and editing coaches should be given as a permission. Again, if they need to have the ability to manage the list of coaches for their team, they should have this permission. And then view, edit team attendance. This, of course, is the one that I mentioned. The team administrator is the one who should for sure have these permissions. When it comes to scheduling tools, a lot of times with a team administrator, again, depending on how you delegate or hold on to the responsibilities of distributing, like creating games and practices and schedules, you may not give them any schedule tools at all. But if they are supposed to be able to create games for themselves or create their own practices, then absolutely grant them those permissions. The worst case is if you don't give them the permission, they have to call or email someone to get a change made to the schedule. Different organizations have different reasons for wanting either of those options. And then generally speaking, reporting game scores is something that at the team level they should have access to, but they can only report games that involve their team. So those are the team level permissions that a team administrator should typically be granted. There are lots of other roles that exist within an organization. So the registrar and treasurer one, going back to Beth's question, the registrar and treasurer role, typically there's some that you absolutely need, and then there's lots of nice to haves. So I'm going to say that the absolutely need is view players. There's going to be a view coaches. If you also deal with volunteers and registrants, you need to be able to do the registrant search and volunteer search as well. This is what at the very minimum gives you the ability to search for those people in the system. You may also need to be able to view officials if you do registration for referees or umpires as well. With those, now you're going to be able to search for people and see their information. In order to see their registration data, I need the permission for viewing registration data. There are some organizations who may have a second permission related to registration data that says to view financial data. If that's the case, select both the view registration and view financial data. Not all organizations have access or have a separate permission for that. The next one that they should have access to is going to be to create and manage your registration forms. This is what gives you permission to access that individual form builder so that you can create the forms that people will then use to register against. Now you've got the permission to create the form and go ahead and publish it. And now that players have registered, I can go and I can search for players and I can view their registration data. The last one that I always recommend is email announcements. You are always able to send email announcements from the search results of your searches if you have permission to search for people. But having the specific email announcements permission just allows you to send more general email announcements to the organization. Another role that often needs permissions at that association wide level is going to be the scheduler role. So, scheduler or ICE convener, or lots of different names for what the scheduler may be. But the managing leagues and association teams, these are the permissions that that scheduler should have access to. Really, your main contact has access to these, but your scheduler should also be able to manage it. And then we shouldn't really be granting these permissions to a whole lot of other people, because you don't want people creating teams that shouldn't exist within your organization. These people should also be the ones that have access to managing schedules and managing your seasons. As I mentioned a few times, I do recommend that this gets done at the master menu. We'll see that during the team and league admin side, we do have a managed season and schedule permission here. I don't recommend giving it out at the team or league specific level, because it is best to manage that from the master menu. Another one that's very important for the scheduler is going to be your venues. Adding venues is part of your scheduling. So it's in here somewhere. I'm just not, there it is, add, edit venues. So this is where you create your actual surfaces. So if you're hockey, this is where you create all of your ice surfaces, your rinks, or your soccer fields, or your baseball diamonds. So venues are where you play or where you practice. So this should again be a permission that really only is restricted to the master menu, so that you don't end up with accidental duplicate venues. And I always use the same example because I live in a town where this happens all the time. I live by something called the Cole Harbor Place. Everyone calls it CHP. And then within the Cole Harbor Place, there are two rinks called Scotia 1 and Scotia 2. If we have someone who entered the venue as CHP Scotia 1, and then someone else who just adds Scotia 1, and someone else who adds is Cole Harbor Place 1. Now we've got 3 venues in the system that are actually the same exact venue, and we've got potential for scheduling conflicts that the Goalline system may not catch. So keep this permission restricted as much as possible. For a scheduler, the next thing that they should be able to do is basically everything in this section, but for sure, being able to upload a schedule file and being able to add games and practices. These are going to be super important permissions for them to be able to do that job. You may want to grant permission to upload schedule files to your individual league and team control panels as well. I'll scroll down to the bottom here. There is an all option for specific permissions that you can check that gives them that permission all the way up. The next role, and this is the last role, and then I'm going to summarize some best practices. So I am going to give you guys a quick warning. I'll go about 5 minutes over the time, and I do apologize for that, but better than the 17 minutes I did not too long ago. So the next role that we'll talk about is your communication person or your webmaster. Lots of different labels for that one as well. A summer student often has a job for helping out the organization, and they're often going to be your website, webmaster. So the communication tool section is really where they're going to need their tools to be. There are some permissions here where I recommend that you restrict a little bit. So as we mentioned earlier regarding standard menu settings and site configuration, you may or may not want to grant this to someone whose job is to create web pages and manage, news articles and send emails, because these can affect a lot more than just your website's menu. But as long as you have trust in the person who is, given this role, you can give them these permissions, because they may find it useful to be able to manage standard menu settings and relabel something as needed. But your main contact always has access to all of these things. So a communications person or a webmaster, generally all of these, but specifically they should have access to your news articles and your sending of email announcements. If they should also be able to create web pages, you can give them that permission as well. And then there's some other ones that may exist for you, things like adding ads to the site or ticker announcements. These are things that are really useful to have. But if you have someone who is, maybe they're not the webmaster, maybe they're a sponsor coordinator, maybe they also need a little bit of these permissions as well. So just keep in mind, what are they expected to do, and make sure that they have a checkbox that allows them to do it. When you have an administrator in the system, I'm just going to go and click edit real quick on one of my existing ones. When you have a website administrator who you've granted some permissions, you are going to find that you can log in as that person. That lets you view what they can see when they log into the site, and anything that they don't have permission for is grayed out and they cannot click on it. So if they're saying, I'm the website admin or webmaster and I can't create a news article, you can see that, this person doesn't have permission to create a news article. And so they probably need that permission. So that's just something that you can always do, is log in as an administrator and sort of masquerade as them, so that you can see exactly what it is that they see in the system. So that covers the different roles that typically happen. Now, there are, of course, a lot of different roles in sport organizations. Not all of them are kind of out of the box type things. And you may have someone who wears more than one of these hats. And in that case, all you need to do is just combine them and just give them additional permissions, so that that person still can manage with one username and password to access your site, with the permission to access all the features and all of the menu layers that they should have access to. Some best practices that I always like to bring up when it comes to how do I manage Goalline from start to finish. And I alluded to a lot of this as we've gone along. The first thing is your leagues and teams, get those in the system, and then you're fine. Then what about your season and your schedule? So when does your season start and stop? Best practice is to look at, when do I want kids to be on the field or on the ice doing a tryout? I want my season to start sometime before that. When do we finish with our final playoff rounds? The championship game at the very end, last thing that we do all season. What date is that? Your season should end after that. And that typically is going to give you that date range that you can probably emulate from season to season. So keep in mind, anything such as tryouts, preseason schedules, tiering rounds, balancing rounds, all the way through to your playoffs. You don't do separate seasons for things like regular season and playoff season. That's all 21-22 is the season. The schedule is regular season. The schedule is playoff, and so on. Adding your venues. So I talked a minute ago about venues and how important it is to make sure that you don't end up with duplicates. And I'm going to show you a really awesome feature. This is one of my favorite features. I talk about it a lot when it comes to the referee system, because it's just one of those features that really helps prevent any kinds of conflicts at all from happening with your schedules. So what Goalline can do is, when you have a venue that you break down into smaller venues for cross ice games, half field games, breaking up a football field into 4 or 5 different flag football fields, using the tool that we have available to split this into smaller venues. What this does is it lets me say, we break this down into sixths. So I have my full venue is one venue. Each of these 6 is another venue. So now in total, I've got 7 venues. If I schedule something here and then try to schedule something at my full venue, it's going to recognize that that's a scheduling conflict, because we already have something booked here, or vice versa. If my full venue is already booked, I won't be able to use one of my partition venues. And you can break this down either by halves, quarters, thirds, or sixths, depending on what you need. And you can make it sure that the right venues are listed, so that you can always make sure you're going to catch all of those different conflicts. Super common for a hockey rink to be a full ice and then a half 1 or 2, or A and B. Soccer fields often will break down to maybe more than 2, just because soccer fields are big. So it might break down into halves or thirds or even smaller, like the six that we saw there. So your venues, once you've added all of your venues, you should be good to go and not really have to revisit this feature down the road. But if you do, you can always edit venues to, timed out here. You can always edit venues to make them more appropriate. The next thing would be getting your registration forms looked at. So looking at your registration forms, there's going to be an option here to copy and archive. So once you've created your very first registration form, like we'll create an athlete form, we'll get all of the questions that we want, we'll set up all of the required information, we'll set up our programs and our prices, everything. Now, next year, I want all those same things. So instead of having to create a brand new form from scratch, I'm going to create a copy of that form. And then I'm just going to update the information that might be date sensitive, or if our prices changed from last year to this year, just make those quick adjustments. And I don't have to build everything from scratch. The best practice on this one is going to be to, at least when you archive the form, but oftentimes it's reasonable to include this all the time, is to have something that pings your season, something that relates this to your season. So 2021 registration versus just registration. I do want my title of my form typically to say something like, 2021 player registration, 2021 coach registration, just so that it's super easy and no one's going to get confused about what form should they be using when it comes to your public site. And it also will help when it comes to doing those registration searches down the road. If I want to look back on 2015's registration, I need to see the reference to 2015 in the title of that form. So that's one of the best practices that I would talk about here with registration, is at the very least, when you go to archive your form, so copy and archive is right here, I want at least the archive to have a label that includes the year. I might not need it in my current form because it's current, right? But when I go to archive it, I want to make sure that I'm archiving it and we know that that was 2021 or that was 2020. Assigning players and coaches. I mentioned this already, so I won't touch on this too much, but assigning players and coaches is another one where this can be done in so many different ways that if assign multiple players works best for you, then I often do recommend doing that one. The other one is that if you have an organization process where you kind of build them all out on paper, you all sit in a room together and you work it out on a spreadsheet, you can take that spreadsheet and import the update. So you don't ever really have to do a lot of one at a time stuff when it comes to assigning. And if you're curious about what method works best for you, I do recommend having a quick chat with our support team, because I think they can provide some good advice on what works for you based on how the tools are in the system. And the last thing I'll say is that practices, I do recommend that as much as possible, add your practices in as soon as possible in your season. And the reason for this is going back to that conflict checking. If you've got your set practice schedules already worked out and you're just not quite sure about game schedules, adding your practice schedules in is going to be yet another way to help make sure you don't end up with conflicts later on. And you would be able to see the kind of conflict that you have. Say team A has a practice at 6 on Friday, and you're trying to create a game for them. You would be able to see what the conflict is and take out the practice, because I'm sure that, if the game schedule is going to trump the practice schedule. So adding in your practices, especially when you have consistent time slots for your various teams, is really quick and easy to do, either through an upload or through our recurring practice option. So I can say this team's practice time is going to be, we'll start on Wednesdays. So they're going to practice on Wednesdays at 7 from now until the end of May. I can say that this is a recurring practice, and so it's going to repeat weekly from now until the end of May. And now I don't have to create all of those practices manually. I can just say that I'm creating one practice. So this team, this venue repeats and it's going to add that practice for me from now until the end of May for this team. And now I can go through and do the next team and the next team and the next team. This also allows you to set up more easily your shared practices when you know you're going to have teams practicing together. The U9 example is another one where we often are going to see teams sharing their venue for their practice time. And so when you set it up this way, I can say red and purple are both going to have a shared practice at this venue at this time, and it's going to recur. And now it's nice and easy. Now I've got 2 teams worth of practices out of the way for the entire season. So that's one of the ones that I definitely like to get out and have people do early, is add the practices, so long as you know what your practice time slots are, as early as possible in the season. So I know I went a little bit over, and I went over what I said I was going to go over, and I do apologize for that, but I do appreciate you sticking around. And if you're watching this on the recording, power to you. Good job getting this far. Thanks so much for attending. We have, as I mentioned a couple of times, lots of ways to get in touch with us if you have any specific questions about your organization or specific features. So don't hesitate at all to reach out to our support team or check out our help information. You will receive a recording of this webinar as soon, just within a few minutes of it being over. But then I'll also be posting it up to the YouTube channel. So feel free to point any of your administrator colleagues to the Goalline YouTube channel if they didn't sign up for this one. So thanks so much, everyone. Appreciate your time. We'll see you again in another couple of weeks. Have a great day. Awesome, Holly. Thanks. I love hearing that.